3 a.m., I jolted awake to a sound outside. Snap, snap. That was unusual for our Ohio farmhouse. We were surrounded in every direction by vast fields of corn, miles from the nearest neighbor. And I'd know if we left the gate open or one of Madison's toys was out. I'd done my nightly check of the backyard about 1,000 times. But as I lay there, still under the blankets, the noise continued. Snap, snap, snap. I ran to the window and threw back the curtains. The corn stretched out as far as the eye could see, rippling and churning like some great dark ocean. It stopped just short of Madison's swing set, casting long shadows onto the grass that nearly reached the back door. Snap, snap. The stalks shifted and swayed, shaking the husks so hard they threatened to fall. "David, there's something out there." "Probably just a raccoon," he slurred, pulling the covers over his head. "That's bigger than a raccoon. Look at it." The corn rippled and roiled, as if something large was moving underneath. Snap, snap, snap. "What if there's someone out there? I'm going to check the locks." "You already checked them 1,000,000 times, like you do every night," he groaned. "Just go back to sleep." I didn't listen. I opened the door and stepped out of the room. Way at the end of the hall, Madison's door was hanging open. "Maddie," I called, my voice shaking. And then I got that terrible feeling that only a parent knows. Something's terribly wrong, sinking, paralyzing, throbbing in your chest as you try to tell yourself she's okay. Don't freak out, I'm sure she's fine. But she wasn't fine. The bed was empty. "Madison!" I ran out the back door into the yard. "Madison! Where are you?" I screamed out into the night. The corn was still. Now that I was out there, I saw the evidence. Little bare footprints in the mud leading up to the cornfield's edge. Where they disappeared, the corn was slightly trampled. 2 stalks leaned in opposite directions, as if forcefully pushed apart. "Madison!" I screamed, as loud as I could. But I was met with only silence. David stumbled out after me. "She must have just went out in the corn to explore or something. We'll find her," he said, his tone barely convincing. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and squeezed himself between the leaning stalks. "Hey, Maddie!" he yelled, with panic trembling his voice. I took a deep breath and squeezed in after him. The corn scratched my body. My legs were shaking so badly, every step threatened to send me tumbling into the mud. The white orb of David's flashlight hovered a few feet in front of me. But other than that, the cornfield was pitch black. I was about to collapse with panic when the corn thinned out. And then we were in what appeared to be some sort of clearing or crop circle. The corn had been trampled into the ground in a small circle, roughly 10 feet in diameter. In the center stood Madison, facing away from us. "Madison!" I screamed. She didn't turn around. David was frozen, staring at her back, the flashlight shaking in his hand. "Are you okay, Madison?" I turned her around. Number I was staring at a blank face, a face made of burlap. A brown wig was stuck on top with safety pins. An Elsa shirt was stretched over the bloated waist of straw. The bottoms, patterned pink Fair Isle, were put on backwards. I began to shake. "Those are the pajamas I put her to bed in." My voice cracked. "She wanted the My Little Pony ones, but they were dirty. And... What kind of sicko would do something like this?" David said, his panic boiling into anger. He pulled out his phone and began dialing 911. Snap, snap, snap. The corn shook and shivered all around us. Shadows, slowly coalescing between the stalks, surrounded us in a ring of black. And then, before I could react, a hand shot out between the dark stalks. It grabbed David by the arm. He lost his balance and toppled backwards, his phone flying to the ground. "David!" A cold hand latched onto my waist. I was yanked into the corn. My back hit the cold mud. The corn scratched and poked at my sides. "Get off me!" I screamed, swatting blindly at the stalks. Black slowly faded into hues of indigo and gray as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. And then I could see them. Interrupting the vertical pattern of the corn stalks, there were several short shadows standing over me. Then the whispers started. Hissing, hurried whispers that seemed to generate the very wind that blew through the stalks. The corn shivered and shook, and then a heavy silence filled the air. I tried to scream, but quickly realized one of them had tied something over my mouth. But then I heard it, and my heart soared. 911, what's your emergency? A tinny voice breaking through the silence. I pulled my neck up, and through the stalks, I saw the white light of the phone, glowing against the trampled corn. Mmph, mmph. I tried to scream through the gag. It didn't work. Similar grunts several feet away from me rung out in the night. David. Crush. A low rumbling sound filled the air. The corn shook above me, harder than I'd seen it all night, stretching and swaying, stalks wildly crashing into each other. And as the voice continued, 911, hello? What's your emergency? A loud rush, like an airplane flying right overhead, filled my ears. I looked up just in time to see the lights, red, purple, and green, blinking in an odd asynchronous pattern. The scarecrow wearing Maddie's clothes was enveloped in white light. And then, with a deafening hiss, it was yanked up into the night. I looked back at my captors. In the strange, flashing lights, their faces were illuminated, and I saw that they weren't terrors, monsters, or murderers. They were children. Horribly disfigured children. Some were missing noses. Others had long scars running straight down their faces, as if someone had split open their heads to explore what was inside. Quite a few were missing ears, and one had no teeth. All of them had a profound sadness in their eyes, except for the one to my left, who had no eyes. But they were also smiling, just a little. As the light disappeared, and the faces faded back into the shadows, the hands on me loosened. The gag fell away. The shadows receded into the corn, except for one. Mommy! Snap, snap. With a squeal, two warm arms wrapped around my waist. Maddie. Oh my God, Maddie. I began to sob, hugging her tighter than I ever have in my life. Are you okay? And Maddie. The broken, hopeful voice of David sounded to my left. Crunch, crunch. He ran over to us. I'm fine, Daddy. Let's get out of here, he said, grabbing both our hands and yanking us back through the corn. We ran back into the house, locking the doors and calling the police. Madison was in a different set of clothes. One's dirty, smudged with mud, and riddled with holes. But she was smiling, safe, and happy. They saved me, Mommy, she kept saying, tugging on my arm. The bad men were gonna get me, but they tricked them. As the police were taking our statements, as the sun was cresting over the corn, Maddie stood at the back door. Bye-bye, she said, waving wildly at the cornfield. The last weekend of my summer vacation was spent in the countryside with Tony. I told my parents I'd leave his house on Sunday morning, but we had so much fun I stayed until the evening. As I was about to leave, his mom offered to drive me to the station. I refused, of course, since I didn't want to abuse her hospitality. But most importantly, the sun was setting, and I loved to walk alone along the cornfields. What a beauty to behold. The last sun rays bathing those fields of green and gold in a magnificent orange hue. No people, no cars, houses scarce and far between. A lovely countryside stroll. Until that shadow appeared from the corner of my eye. It was a lone walker in the distance. Even though I knew the locals were kind and welcoming, I couldn't stop looking back at the coated figure wearing a hat. What an odd thing to wear in the summer, I thought. Something about him made me feel uncomfortable. So just to be safe, I took a sudden sharp turn into a smaller trail going downhill, a shortcut to the station. The moment I disappeared between the high stalks, I broke into a trot to add more distance between us. 100 feet or so later, I glanced over my shoulder. Not one shadow. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued, feeling a little silly. Minutes later, the wind blew a strange odor from behind, something of a mix between sweat, cigarettes, and mildew. I turned my head while shading my eyes from the blinding sunset with my arm and squinted. A long shadow was creeping up to me from the top of the trail, cast by the dark-hatted figure. Instead of heading straight to the main road much further ahead, I dashed into the cornfield and zigzagged between the stalks towards the station. I was certain I'd lose him that way, because I used to play hide-and-seek in them when I lived in the countryside. I knew exactly how to disappear within this maze. Or so I thought. The plants began to rustle from where I entered. I was being chased, no doubt. Adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I began to run in a straight line. I risked a swift glance over my shoulder and saw a silhouette emerging from between the crops less than 100 feet from me. Somehow he had managed to reduce the gap between us just like that. I immediately shot to my right, sprinted, then turned left again. The rustling was audibly closing in on me. My heart was throbbing. I couldn't feel my legs. It was as if my body was magically bobbing up and down mid-air. The maze turned into obscurity as the last sun rays made place for the moon and stars. I was exhausted but kept running. Left, right. Then I stumbled upon something, but managed to regain my balance quickly. It was dark. I continued straight for a while. Right again. I desperately tried to orient myself towards the station, but the rustle was so close I could hear him panting. Then, hope had appeared in the form of a streetlight piercing through the crops. The road. I hurtled out of the cornfield so quickly that had a car passed by, it'd have hit me without a doubt. The station was right there. My legs were about to give out. Every part of my body pained me. My heart was pounding so hard inside my chest that I thought it was going to burst open. The only thing that kept me going was the faint rustle behind me. I didn't know whether he was still there or not, but I dared not look. I swallowed hard between several wheezes as I dragged my body down the road, up the stairs leading to the platform of the station. I was exhausted, heaving, wheezing, hurting from all that exertion. To make things worse, the station was completely deserted. My legs were quivering as I lumbered to the timetable. 3 minutes left until arrival. I initially intended to take the following train so I could sit on a bench and let the end of summer melancholy numb my mind. But that idea was long gone. My mind was numb enough as it was, and so were my legs. 2 minutes left. The long, thin seconds hand on the large station clock seemed to move in slow motion. I scoured the platform, ready to dash anywhere. No one. I just realized how thirsty I was. The tang of iron in my mouth made matters worse. 1 minute left. Where's that stupid train? I leaned in over the tracks for any hint of its arrival. Any hint at all. Unfortunately, the curved tracks made it impossible to see far beyond. Time was up. No train in sight. I trudged to the timetable and double-checked that I read the time and weekday correctly. No mistake. It was definitely running late. A warm breeze made me shudder, and my clammy shirt didn't help. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, followed by its echo. Clomp, 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 clomp. The plodding steps were drawing nearer. Clomp, clomp, and nearer. Clomp, clomp. From the staircase on the other side of the tracks emerged a dark, wide-brim hat, followed by a gangling body wearing a navy trench coat. He had found me. The man slowly tilted his head up, exposing everything below the shadow of his hat. A grin formed on his thick bearded face, slowly widening, first exposing his uneven teeth, then widened some more. My hands flew to my mouth, but not before I let out a muffled cry. His beard gradually crawled out of the way, widening his mouth until it became one curved line, stretching from one ear to the other, looking as if someone had nearly cut his face in half. The man then ambled in my direction, spreading his arms like a predator ready to jump on its prey from over the tracks. As if by miracle, the train had arrived. His smile vanished, and I saw him hurry back down the stairs. He was coming. While the train's wheels screeched on the rails, slowing its rhythmic clatter, I scanned each compartment in search of the one holding the most passengers. I hopped on the busiest one as soon as the doors opened, containing only 5 people inside. Come on, close the doors. Please close them quickly, I thought, nervously locking my eyes on the stairs. Flashing lights, warning beeps. The doors were about to close when the hat surfaced from the stairway, followed by the man's body. 3, 4 quick strides, and he barely hopped on board. I watched him lurk up to the door of the neighboring compartment with his spidery legs. We were only separated by 2 doors. I felt sick. Our gazes met for an instant. He seemed to relish my terror. There was something about his eyes that made everything around us melt away, creating a world where nothing but the 2 of us existed, a world where only one of us could exist. And we both knew who would come on top. I snapped out of it when he licked his lips and immediately averted my sight. My legs begged me to sit, but I dared not for fear he'd drag me into his world again. Sitting down would have only made me too vulnerable to escape his grasp. 6 stations to go. Each time we made a stop, an impulse screamed at me to run away. To where? Another empty cornfield illuminated by nothing but the crescent moon. At least here, surrounded by a small group of people, I felt somewhat safe. The soft, rhythmic rocking of the train didn't soothe me at all. I was tired, but there was no way I'd nod off. Not with him nearby. I tried to recall what led to this, why I didn't say, "Yes, please bring me to the station," to Tony's mom. The whole reason I wanted to be left alone, to wander among those fields, was to imprint this colorful painting, etch it as my last summer memory of the year. Instead, there was a dark blotch dripping on my canvas, and the more I tried to wipe it off, the more its grime spread onto nearby colors. I got anxious when the train slowly squealed to a halt at the 6th station, where I had to make my connection. Most passengers got off when the doors opened. Not me. I waited patiently, until the doors were on the verge of closing. Halfway through, I jumped off onto the platform, apologizing as I almost bumping an old lady to the ground. My stalker bewildered look made me smile nervously. The way he slowly drifted to the left side, disappearing with the train towards the next station, was almost comical. But there was no time to rest. I was still half an hour from home, so I hurried to my track, where, minutes later, my connection arrived. With quivering legs, I slumped into the seat like a sack of potatoes, face in hands. If I wasn't in public, I might have cried. My body was still convulsing from the encounter. I couldn't imagine what to do were he here again. The thought made me jolt up. I quickly looked left and right, 2, 3 times, until I was certain no hatted man with a coat was in sight. One nearby passenger clicked her tongue and scowled while she went to sit a little further away from me. I felt bad for her because my body odor was atrocious. Or maybe she thought I was a little weird. I sat back down and tried to peer out of the window. It was so dark outside, all I could see was my own reflection. I looked atrocious. Instead, I stared at the train's ceiling with a long sigh. Just a little longer, and I'll be back home, safe from everything. When we passed the last station before mine, I stood up and waited in front of the doors. Because we were in the suburbs, only a handful of passengers were about to exit with me. As I got off, I casually looked around and froze. One lanky leg emerged from the neighboring compartment, followed by a tall body and a hand to keep the hat from flying away. He'd been there the whole time. I just ran. The angry voices of the passengers I collided with on the narrow platform didn't matter. I was thirsty. I was in pain. But I didn't care. I had to move on, get back home through the dark streets, poorly illuminated by lamps at regular intervals. My house was on the right side of a curved street, at the end of a small industrious complex. No cars, no pedestrians. I was all alone. As I was flying through the curve, I had to look behind. The emptiness of the night stared right back at me. Did he abandon chase, or did I mistake someone else for him? I kept turning my head when, several houses away from me, stood a figure, shoulders rising up and down. How? I stammered. I couldn't wrap my mind around the way he arrived first. My only alternative was to return to the station and hope I could make it to the other side, where my friend Olivia lived. She was my last resort. I don't know how I did it. But I managed to move my legs, even though they were twitching madly, and ran. My knees felt like they were about to snap my legs in half, but I couldn't stop. The warm summer breeze made matters even worse. How was he not dead from exhaustion with all those clothes on? The clacking echo from his shoes chasing me, akin to being pursued by an imaginary monster in the dark, frightened me so much it gave me enough strength to flee. Please let him fall down. Please let him go away. I was whimpering and tears began to slide off my cheeks. The station was right there. I hurtled to the first row of houses. The fourth one was Olivia's. All my thoughts and strength went into one last spurt. I leapt over the small fence, over the doorsteps, and crashed hard into the door. I couldn't stand up. "Help! Open up!" I yelled, banging on the door. My body was completely drained, and the yells took so much of my breath I almost passed out. He was scaling the fence. His face was inhuman, filled with wrinkled crevasses and eyes sparkling with hatred. But worst of all was his wide-open mouth. I could see his scars, jagged as if someone had sliced both cheeks open with a bread knife. His long, knobbly fingers, hairy like spider legs, were reaching for me. I instinctively flinched and shut my eyes when the door suddenly banged open on my head, closed, then slowly opened again. Olivia's father. "What? What?" he barked, peering from the gap. "Oh, it's you. What's this all about? What are you doing here?" I immediately clutched his leg. "Man. Behind. Help." I choked, holding fast. My eardrums were throbbing so hard my own voice seemed distant. "Man? What man?" he asked, struggling out of the door I was partially obstructing, scanning the surroundings. No one was there. He disappeared. "Please, let me in." Sure, he said. "Can you walk?" When I shook my head, he called, "Isabella! Come and help me." His wife hurried to the porch, and they both dragged me inside, gently laying me on the couch. Isabella's comforting voice asking me, "What's the matter? Are you okay?" made me burst into tears, pleading to call my parents. I later learned that Olivia wasn't home because she was staying over as I did. And that's all right. I didn't want her to see me in that hysteric state anyway. Within minutes, my dad picked me up and drove me home. Before I recounted my story, they gave me some time to cry myself out. My parents ended up calling the cops, who were less than helpful as they immediately discredited me because Olivia's father hadn't seen anyone behind me. I felt like even my parents doubted my story, even though they seemed genuinely concerned. Needless to say, I spent the last days of my vacation locked inside my room, sobbing and recovering in my bed. By some miracle, I didn't seem to have any grave injuries. Back at school, I told my friends what had happened. I was shocked to hear most of them calling me an attention seeker. But among the others rose an unexpected voice. "I know the man. Andrew interjected to everyone's surprise. Tall, wearing a navy coat with a fitting hat. Very pale, right? Yes, yes, I shrieked. Have you also been? Kind of, yeah. He shifted uncomfortably in place. It happened in mid-August. I was in a public toilet, alone, minding my own business at the furthest urinal when he came in. Instead of leaving some space between us, he settled right next to me. I felt overshadowed, so I shyly looked up and saw him smile, staring at my dick. He wasn't even peeing or anything, you know? He just stood there. Oh my God, what did you do? Asked Olivia. I wanted to tell him to fuck off, but when I saw his eyes, I just froze. He looked like a complete psycho or something, so I hurried and got the hell out of there. And he let you go, just like that? I asked. Well, not exactly. When I tried to leave, he blocked the way so I couldn't get through. And then he swallowed. Then his mouth opened from ear to ear, like it had been cut open or something. I think he was smiling, but it was so unreal to see all those jagged teeth slowly emerging from behind his beard. He closed his eyes and furrowed his brows. His tongue came out, like he was about to lick me or eat me or something. I was paralyzed with fear, but then someone else entered and he left. It was wild. My mouth was wide open. The other kids immediately bombarded us with questions. Andrew, unlike me, was the cool kid in my class, and everyone trusted him. There were still skeptics, but I didn't care. It was weirdly comforting to hear someone else's experience. If you see him again, just scream and point at someone for help, okay? Andrew advised me, and it made me feel a bit safer. Who even believes this crap? One of the skeptical girls said scornfully. It was Melissa. Why would we make this up? I said irritably. My story and Andrew's are different, but about the same man. What's there not to believe? She rolled her eyes. Okay, where did you see him? I told her again the exact location, and so did Andrew. Unsurprisingly, it was in the same vicinity. Okay, she said. I'll go there. This weekend. At dusk. I'm not scared. Mel, just don't, Andrew sighed. He might not even be there then, and if he is, you're just putting yourself in danger. Nah, I'm fine. I'll keep you guys updated. And she walked to another group of friends. Andrew and I stared at each other, and we both shrugged. Melissa had a big mouth, but rarely bit through it. The weekend came. For a fraction of a second, I thought about going back to the cornfields to check on Melissa, but I was certain she wouldn't go. Even if she did, I wouldn't feel any safer with her on my side. At the end, I basically lived inside my room for 2 days straight. Cue to Monday. Melissa was absent. At this point, we all thought it was a distasteful prank, or that she'd gotten suddenly sick or something. We went to class, school ended, and I was back home again, being driven by my dad instead of taking the train. He was a small business owner, so he could afford to take some time off work, especially for me. At dinner, I told my parents the story, but they didn't seem to care. Just another stupid teenager prank, my dad shrugged. She'll be back tomorrow, all right. Shh, my mom pressed a finger to her lips, raising the television's sound. A broadcaster stood in a familiar place. Anfield, where Melissa was reportedly last spotted on Saturday evening. Authorities are still conducting a thorough search with the help of the locals inside this cornfield you can see behind me. But as of now, they haven't found any trace of the female teenager. Her mother. I couldn't believe it. It must have been a mistake, or someone with the same name. Then they showed us a photograph. It was Mel. Anyone with information to come forward and help the investigation by calling the following number. If our local news station wasn't on, I could have heard a pin drop. My parents stared at me like their child had been swapped by an alien. Without warning, my mother hugged me. Hard. I'm so sorry for your friend, but I'm so glad it wasn't you." She sobbed, and I cried. Emotions were high for the rest of the evening. We called the number, of course, and they took my deposition, unlike our local cops. Going back to school was unusual, to say the least. Andrew and I were the center of attention for the next few weeks or so, until the news stories began to settle. I've blamed myself ever since, for telling this story in front of everyone, for not stopping Mel. I know I should have cried for help on the train, but then I remember his face, his eyes, and I shudder. I had been petrified then, and I would still be now were we to meet again. The peace of mind I had when I walked outside before this incident has yet to return, and I doubt it ever will. Maybe this is my punishment for letting Mel go. The old self-inflicted scars on my arm are a silent tribute to the life that was exchanged, proof that I truly am still alive, while another soul took my place. And for that sin, I am living within a purgatory of constant remorse. When I tell people I'm afraid of cornfields, they think it's cause of that old movie. But it's not. I was afraid of them, way before that. When I was 7, my dad landed his dream job along with a dream salary. He found a small town and had a house built there. First one in the subdivision, the biggest yard, the best looking, and completely surrounded by cornfields. All the cornfields were big, except for the one directly behind my house. That one was tiny compared to the rest. And directly behind that cornfield was the only small airport within an hour of the major airport hub. Not many people flew in or out of this little airport, and the runway was so little, only single-engine planes could land there. I learned all this through my dad, especially considering, once a year, there was a crash. Usually, some big shot tried to land in a plane and crashed it. It was scary being the only house. It was so very dark at night, and the sounds of the insects were so loud, it kept me up at night. And for some reason, there were toads, hundreds of them, all over our yard and the small blacktop drive that cut through the cornfield from the main road. I can say that it was the smell and the millions of flies that bothered me the most. I had never seen so many flies, even in the city. And they always came during the planting and harvesting of the corn. During my first fall there, I was excited, thinking that I could open up my bedroom window and let the breeze in. But it smelled so bad, my mom would shut it and turn on the fan. Over the years, it just became a custom, fan on, windows closed unless it was summer. Within those years, about 10 houses sprouted up, and every house had 2 to 3 kids. These kids became known as the Circle Street Kids, Circle being our street name. Then my best friend moved in, and like all the kids in the world, I felt safe with my best friend. So one night, my friend Randy and I decided to camp out in tents in the back of my yard. We choose a spot about 1 foot in front of the stirred-up flat cornfield, and my dad pitched us a little fire and told us to holler if we needed him. It was that night that we saw it. We had just gotten done eating our s'mores and telling stories when we first heard it. It sounded like a gurgle. I think the closest thing I can relate to that sound would be the gurgle of the geysers right before explosion. It just seemed to try to suck at the ground out in the middle of the field. As soon as the gurgle started, the toads came. If a toad could run, this is what they would look like. I felt the first one hit my foot, and we both shined our light into the middle of the cornfield. There, in the middle of the newly planted cornfield, was a dark-looking spot, like a hole. And toads were jumping out of that spot like a volcano. We were excited. For some reason, we thought we were okay, and that we had solved a mystery of the street. We laughed about it as the toads tickled our feet. We laughed until the smell came. It was something like the smell of the cat-infested dumpster behind the butcher shop. It was so bad, I wanted to throw up. I was just about to holler for my dad when it showed up. It flew up out of the hole and hovered mid-air. It was black and greenish, and the flashlight seemed to cause it to glitter, as if it had scales. It had a long snout, almost like a horse, but had wings like a bat. I remember seeing a vampire bat at the zoo and thinking about how dangerous those claws were at the end of its wings. Well, the claws at the end of this thing's wings could literally take down a small plane. It hovered over the dark hole, and slime dripped from its black skeletal legs. And as soon as the slime hit the ground, flies seemed to explode out of it. Within minutes, we could not see the creature from the flies, but we heard it. When I look back on that day, I wondered why I never heard the noise before. Maybe because the windows were all shut, or maybe even worse, it had someone to talk to for the first time in its life. I don't know, but like a man screaming through the hole in a mask, it called for us by name. And as it flied higher up in the sky, the louder it got. I looked at my best friend, and like the toads, we got up and ran as fast as we could to my back door. It was the scariest run of my life. It would swoop down towards us, and the flies would get real bad, surrounding my nose and ears. I stumbled trying to bat them away from my ears. Thoughts of maggots growing in my ears scared me to no end. We made it to the house, and so did a little toad. We kept him and named him George. For some reason, he made me feel safer. But we never told anyone. We were afraid people would call us crazy. A couple years went by, and the airport was shut down, and the local junior high was built in its place. It was a cool-looking school, and I would be attending. I was excited until I was told that there would not be bus service for the Circle Street kids, because we lived to close, and we would have to walk to and from school, past that cornfield. The first week of school happened, about a month after planting. The 10 Circle kids met at the stop sign and walked to school together. I will never forget that morning. It was dark, and the sidewalk was just a little dirt path, within 2 inches of the edge of the cornfield. Randy and I, scared to death, looked out into the cornfield and saw a blackish area. Some of the other kids noticed and said they would investigate it later, that maybe it was oil or something. One kid did and died later that month from a brown recluse bite. His family moved away, but I knew that that creature had something to do with his death. I wished we could move away too. That was the year that the last airplane crashed in my town, and the first year that a kid died under weird circumstances. I can tell you that I walked that strip in front of that cornfield for 4 years. My friend lasted for 2. The last time she walked it was right before harvest. It was in the morning, and it was dark again. She just stopped right there in front of it and stared at it. I looked to see what she saw, and I saw it, swiftly lumbering in and out of the paths between the corn. I looked away, but she didn't, and the next thing I know, she just stepped out in front of a car. The car swerved and hit an oncoming car. Randy was fine, but the driver died. She was ejected from the car and sailed right over me and landed in the cornfield. I saw it then, like I saw it that night, hovering high above the dead woman. Its head was thrown back, and it seemed to grow before my eyes. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it dropped into the corn. I asked Randy why she did that, and she didn't know. She couldn't even remember the accident. They thought maybe she had some traumatic shock and forgot it all. She does not remember it at all, even to this day. But I will never forget the smile on that horsey, slimy face as it dropped down into the brownish green of the cornfield. Well, my father died a couple of months ago and left the house on Circle Street to me. And sadly, after losing my job, I took the house off the market and moved my family in. I can say a lot has changed. There must be over 100 houses in the subdivision, now filling up every corner of the cornfields. Well, not all the cornfields. The one behind my house, the tiny little cornfield that has been in the little town for over 100 years, is still there. And they still plant and harvest corn there every year, and the kids on Circle Street still don't have bus service. And today, my older son brought a toad into the house, and my daughter cried because she wanted one. I was chilled to the bone when my son said, "Just walk outside, There must be 50 of them in our yard. I guess things haven't changed on Circle Street.